Males disproportionately experience being unhoused. Therefore, saying stay at home is clearly misandrist. Everyday sexism. So at the time of recording this, the pandemic is still going on, the pandemic of 2020, or is it going to be COVID? It's COVID-19, but the main effect of it is actually going on in 2020. So when people talk about, the China virus, where it's like everywhere in the world, and they're not talking about it, even just calling it COVID-19 seems inaccurate. Because even though it did start, from what the actual things are coming out, the actual thing did start in 2019, the end towards there. I started hearing about this thing in like December, November, but the actual things are being found out. But anyway, the actual effect of it's happening in 2020 right now. But let me get back to this. So, one of the things that's happening with the pandemic is a lot of stay-at-home orders, guidelines, laws, rules, depending on where you are. Some people are like, you cannot leave your house. Some places, like in China, as I was mentioning, you're being welded into your homes. Some places, mostly in the United States of America, it's just a suggestion, it's a guideline. There are no actual laws out there outright saying you have to stay at home, but there's a lot of public and social shaming. And then another thing that has gone on with this shaming thing is just people bringing in, injecting the identity politics and things in this, trying to bring other things, saying, okay, it's predominantly hurting black people. And then I've also looked globally. Globally, more white people have actually died from it, but that's actually reported. Did you actually know is the difference? Because do you actually trust the numbers coming out of China? Do you actually think in Africa, like here in Kenya right now, we're at 49? Do you think it's actually 49? Or do you think it's just like not enough testing? Also, when you go into these, like, who is being tested as what? If somebody is 80 and then they have 5 other things, comorbidities, and then they catch coronavirus and they die, then all of a sudden, like, that person is considered dying with coronavirus. That is counted in one place. Maybe you go to someone like Russia and that's not counted. They'll count something else. So these figures and numbers, you can't really tell with these things. But there's already people saying it's sexist, it's racist, it's this and this, it's that and that. But so I was just playing on that, and with the whole stay-at-home thing, one thing that is known is all around the world, the majority of the homeless population are men. It's a predominantly male issue. So if you say stay at home, that is technically assuming that people have homes, and then the people who don't have homes, just like the black people who are supposedly disadvantaged because they're going into work because they can't have the actual ability to stay home, they have to be on the front line. Say most of the frontline workers are women. I think it's like 52% or something. Talking about these nurses, brave nurses, they don't have the luxury to just stay at home. They have to be out there in the front lines. Well, who doesn't even have the luxury to have a home? That's mostly males. So is this misandrist to say stay at home? No, it's not. It clearly isn't. But people want to keep coming up with this tripe. And this happens all over the world. This is something that's known. Most people, it might not be known to you because I don't think it's covered in a certain way. I see certain things talking about, like, here from the World Bank blog or something. No, 70% of the world's poor aren't women, but that doesn't mean poverty isn't sexist. They're coming down to the thing where they call it a zombie statistic, something that just keeps going on. And then they say women count for about 50%. And I'm telling you, if it was over 50%, they would say over 50%. So here we know. If this was literally, if this was above 50%, they would probably say exactly the number. It would be above 50%. So we know it's more of this is actually males. But then they start talking about, yes, they're almost 50%, the world's extreme poor, but then we argue that it doesn't mean poverty is gender neutral. Then they start talking into other facts and other things in there. When you talk about outright homelessness, this is one thing that is, as I mentioned, is known. But then they start getting into things like, there's not enough investment in things for women, boys, and girls. They start shoveling boys into that group now because they add the boys into there. Because in some places they say women have to be the primary caregiver, even when there's a divorce, even when that thing happens. But no. If there's a divorce, if there's a breakup and things like this, why don't you actually fight for equal custody to be actually given so the child doesn't have to be a quote-unquote burden onto the female, onto the mother? When you have that kind of situation, why don't you fight and say courts shouldn't be so sexist and award custody to the female 80% of the time, or however majority of the amount of the time that it's actually done? Now, as mentioned before, there's just different places that have different ways of actually checking and counting certain things. And you have the United States of America tends to have some of the better statistics about these things. And there's here National Alliance to End Homelessness. And they state here that 67% of all people experiencing homelessness within the 2018 point in time count are individuals. There are 260,284 men compared to 106,119 women. Thus, men are a majority of individuals experiencing homelessness, 70%, followed by women at 29%. The final 1% are transgender and non binary individuals, discussed in the first installment of this series. Now, I've seen articles about certain transgender college students that were living on campus that are supposedly now being disconvenienced or somehow targeted because they can't actually live as the gender they identify when they go back to their homes. But how many actual people were actually males who just don't really have a home environment to go back to when they were living in the dorms? I haven't seen specifics about that. I've seen specifics talking about just what's being done with homeless populations in different places, but have you heard any targeted actual stories about the males being disproportionately affected by this situation? And to continue, after they go over some states and some locations that skew higher than the national average, Puerto Rico being the highest with 82%, and Louisiana, 82% of the people involved in this situation experiencing homelessness, the individuals, are males. And they say at a more local level, men are a majority of individuals experiencing homelessness in almost all continuums of care, which is, this, I guess, the way they organize a certain area to categorize it. 97% of them. There are several continuums of care that have few women as compared to men experiencing homelessness. The most dramatic in these differences is Youngstown, Mahoma County in Ohio continuum of care, where 8% of the homeless adult population is female and 92% is male. And then below here they list how many of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 11. Yeah, 11 continuums of care where the majority of the individual population experiencing homeless is female, and that's MD 510 in Garrett County, it's 88%, and then the lowest one out of those 11 is MA 504 with Lynn, that's 49%. So I don't know how that 49% is somehow counting into the majority. Like, what? Come on now. I mean, you just have to get over the 10. Why don't you just go with 10? So they have this unsheltered homelessness. You look in here, it says percent of individual men unsheltered, 58%. Going out to Marion County is 68%. Las Vegas County, Nevada is 63%. And then that one is for percent of individual women unsheltered is 78% there. But in Colorado, it's 51%, which is higher than 41% for men. Well, one thing that I also seen in Vegas is this random story. I saw this thing, like someone was a former porn star, and then now there's this underground community of homeless people living in this sort of catacombs under Las Vegas. Pretty crazy. But anyway, so in general, there's more female-only shelters for things like domestic violence and homelessness, targeted towards dealing with females. So even if there was a situation where you could say they literally were the same amount of people facing the same situations that lead to homelessness out there, there is a lot more actual outreach and effort done to help the females rather than the males. So I think this is something that is good to know, and there's a discussion here in the endhomelessness.org. I'll just finish off with discussing some of it or reading some of it. Focusing on equity and fairness requires asking questions on why men are so overrepresented in the homeless population. Many of the answers are found outside the homelessness system. For example, men are overrepresented in the criminal justice system, and roughly 48,000 people entering shelters every year are coming directly from the prisons or jails. Another example is the education system, which many experts suggest is failing boys who are more likely to drop out and experience suspensions/expulsions. Then limited educational experience results in poor employment prospects, increasing the risk of poverty and homelessness. But many answers may lie within the homelessness system, in the setting of priorities and allocation of resources. Equity is not the only consideration of homelessness systems, which often and quite rationally prioritize things like vulnerability, age, or risk of violence as opposed to serving men and women equally. But collecting, analyzing, and using data to examine disparities and consider whether or a proper level of assistance is being provided to overrepresented and or underserved groups may result in a better balance and a more equitable community system. Questions that communities might ask themselves in this process include the following. Can we do more to serve individual adults, especially men? Are we accurately counting different gender groups? Is there something about our practices that leads us to count more men or women? Does the unsheltered data tell us anything about barriers or ineffective programming for males or females that result in them not being sheltered? What differences in approach need to be taken for males and females? None, you sexist, gender oppressive people. There's no difference between men and women. There's differences. Once disparities are identified, are we moving beyond the data to get information directly from our consumers as to their needs? The issues of equity and effectiveness in a vast under-resourced system are not easily addressed, nor is there any universally correct approach. But these are questions that deserve to be considered. An examination of data is one way to begin that community conversation. So with much of these things, I think part of the problem is the state involvement. State kind of systems kind of lead to monopolizing certain things, people just thinking, oh, the state has this, they're going to do it, we don't have to be worried about it, reduces the amount of competition in there. Due to political correctness, there are certain topics you can't discuss, you can't just openly talk about the vast differences between males and women, between different genders, between different races, between different cultures, because to be politically correct, you have to maintain certain things. Then certain funding is given to certain things. When they have this movement in society and say, we need more money to invest in women, and then someone's like, I'm trying to open a shelter to help some people, I have to target my actual programs towards actually helping women, even though in this area, majority of the people who need help are actually men. But the only way for me to actually get funding for my actual system, for my actual program, is to have these women-specific programs. Then when you do that, some of the men who could have used that help, if it was just general funding, don't get the funding. So there's many things that you can think of that actually affect this. And just going in with the initial actual post here, let's stop just trying to inject identity politics in places where there's just where are the places for identity politics besides the garbage heap? In this current pandemic, I don't think it's doing any help just making up these things, because I can keep making these up, and I've made up other ones, and I shall keep making these up until it gets to be more effective, just to show people some of the absurdity in some of the things people say. So that's it for now. Thank you for taking your time to come listen. This is part of the Shorty series where I expand on short thoughts. Should be links to a merchandise store wherever you're doing this, wherever you're getting this, where I'm posting things to try and keep myself from not being homeless ever by just getting my merchandise out there, and you can hopefully buy some stuff, and then you can wear some stuff, and you can donate some stuff. You can do all this stuff with the stuff, and you can like, you can share, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comment section. Until next time.